Joining us now from Perthshire is Scotland's Deputy First Minister, John Swinney. Thank you very much for being on the programme today. Starting off on COVID, Nicola Sturgeon's got much better approval ratings than Boris Johnson for the way that she's dealt with the COVID crisis. But actually, if you look at the recent data from the Office of National Statistics and National Records of Scotland, proportionately more people have been dying with COVID in Scotland than England. So is Nicola Sturgeon being let off the hook?
I think if you look back over the whole of the pandemic, what you see is that the number of cases in Scotland has been about 30% less than it's been in England and in Wales. So I think we've seen a comparatively lower level of the prevalence of the virus, and obviously we've taken different measures to try to tackle the situation within Scotland. But I think when we're dealing with a pandemic, dealing with the fact that people's lives are affected and some lives tragically are lost, I think it's important to focus on the fact that we're doing everything we possibly can do in the best possible way to try to protect the population, and that's been the approach that we've taken as a government.
I'm a bit confused at the first part of your answer there, saying that there's been fewer cases in Scotland. It's not a great thing, is it, if you've got fewer cases but more people are dying?
Well, obviously, the effect of COVID will affect the underlying health of people within a particular society.
And so people in Scotland are unhealthier than people in England?
Well, obviously, there are challenges that people will have with underlying health conditions that will vary from individual to individual around the society. But in general, the cases that have presented themselves in Scotland have been about 30% lower than in the rest of the United Kingdom. And what we're trying to do, in all that we do on a weekly basis, is to minimise the prevalence of the virus, to reduce the cases. And we're seeing steadily a reduction in the number of cases, where we're now seeing cases per 100,000 in Scotland being around about 120, and that's come down quite significantly in the course of the last few weeks, where we've been taking measures to reduce the prevalence of the virus.
There's been an awful lot of conversations and debate about what happens at Christmas, but of course New Year, or Hogmanay in Scotland, is a really big celebration for many families as well. Are you worried that people might ignore the rules and get together to celebrate?
It's been a really difficult one for us, I have to say, Sophie. I think all of us are very nervous about the Christmas period. We obviously understand that everybody will be feeling a sense of desperation almost to be with their families and to have more social interaction with those that they love. And obviously in Scotland we have the added dimension that there's a lot of socialising around about Hogmanay. But what we've decided to do is to agree a limited amount of extra social interaction around about Christmas, and unfortunately say to people for Hogmanay, we're just going to have to stick at home and not have that social interaction. And that'll be difficult this year. But what I would appeal to people to do is to recognise that it's this year. We're seeing improved prospects of tackling the virus with the reductions in caseload, the arrival of the vaccine. That gives us some hope that maybe by next Hogmanay we can enjoy it as we normally do.
Fingers crossed for next year, certainly. We hope that by then we'll be able to have a bit of a return to normality. Now, the SNP's Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, has apologised after tweeting a photographer called Ollie Taylor, who posted a picture from the Highlands. I'm sure you've seen the coverage. He tweeted saying, "As you live in the south of England and travel to Scotland is only for permitted reasons, I'm sure there will be a valid reason as to why you're posting a photo from the north of Scotland last night." Now, of course, it then transpired that Ollie Taylor actually lives about 5 minutes away from where he took the photo. Isn't that an example of the worst kind of COVID snooping?
I think it was a mistake by Ian, and he acknowledged that and he apologised for it. And I think what it demonstrates is that there's a lot of anxiety about where there can be movement around society which can lead to the spread of the virus. And I suppose all I would say is that it's really important that all of us minimise our social interaction and minimise our travelling around the country, because that's what the virus is searching out for. It's searching out for people moving from areas of high prevalence to low prevalence and the spread of the virus. And we've gone for a tiered system in Scotland for some weeks now, where the Highlands is in a much lower set of restrictions than in the Central Belt or in very large parts of England as well. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that people where there is a low prevalence are able to experience as much of life as they possibly can do and to keep virus levels at a low level. Now, that's a challenge where you have some degree of social interaction and moving around, even in areas like the Highlands. So I think if people follow the rules, then it makes it a lot safer and a lot more reassuring for everybody else.
Although, of course, important to say that Ollie Taylor, it seems, was following the rules.
Well, absolutely. Sorry, please
Yeah.
don't. Yeah, but I completely accept what you're putting to me, and I wouldn't want to suggest otherwise. But just as a general observation, the more we minimise our travel, the better it is for minimising the spread of the virus.
Yeah, understood, understood. I'm keen to talk about Alex Salmond. The Scottish Parliament has voted twice to force the Scottish Government to release the legal advice that it received in relation to that trial. You've refused twice. Why are you ignoring the will of the Scottish Parliament?
Well, I've not refused twice. What I've said, what the government's original position was that we do not release legal advice, and no government releases legal advice except in very exceptional circumstances. Now, what I've said to Parliament is that we will consider the fact that Parliament has voted in that way. That consideration is ongoing at the present moment, and that work is being undertaken to determine whether what approach we should take to responding to the votes that Parliament has undertaken. So the issue is not closed. It's very much under active consideration within the Scottish Government, and I'll update Parliament as soon as I've got to a conclusion on the handling of that issue.
So, to be clear, you may very well publish that advice.
Well, there's a possibility that we might do that because Parliament has asked us to do that, and I'm now reflecting on that particular issue. So at no stage have I closed the door on this issue. I've simply set out the fact that the government ordinarily, and that when we're not unusual in this respect, governments don't publish their legal advice. And indeed, the ministerial code under which I operate indicates that I'm not allowed under the ministerial code, other than in exceptional circumstances, to release legal advice. And I need the prior consent of our law officers before I do that. So the rules are quite clear that I shouldn't be releasing the legal advice, but Parliament has obviously voted for that to be the case. And I've said to Parliament I'm considering that issue. So I've not closed the door on it, and it's under very active consideration.
Active consideration, when are you likely to make a decision?
Well, we'll have to move quite soon on this because obviously I understand the committee has it's got its own work programme to take forward. We've cooperated fully with the committee. We've sent thousands of pages of documents to the committee that are looking at this issue, and I want to continue that cooperation. So I'm mindful of the fact that the committee wants to have that information to enable it to complete its work, and we're working as swiftly as we can to address those issues.
OK, thank you very much for coming on the show and setting out some of that. Much appreciated. Good to talk.